Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is Ransomware Trends, 5 Ways to Protect Yourself. Today we will discuss what ransomware is, why it's so prevalent, and preventative measures you can take to stop ransomware attacks. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone of a couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out at the end of the webinar. Our attendees are in listen-only mode, but please submit your questions via the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be doing a live Q&A at the end of this webinar. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. Now I'm going to turn it over to our two presenters, Grant Elliott and Jermaine Jones, to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Grant Elliott. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ostendio. My background is, running Ostendio for about 4 years, before which I was the Chief Operations Officer and Chief Information Security Officer of a successful digital health company. And prior to that, I've kind of run various different roles within telecommunications companies like AT&T, BT, etc. And I'm happy to be with you guys today.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Jermaine Jones. I'm also a co-founder of Ostendio. I'm the CISO as well as the Chief Operating Officer as well. I've been in IT and IT infrastructure architecture enterprise for over 20 years now, in big spaces such as legal, government, as well as healthcare. And so basically through my information technology, cybersecurity is just a part of that, maintaining all of those networks, both nationally and internationally. And so I'm glad to be here. Glad you guys can make the call, and let's get started.
So let's start off with what is ransomware. We obviously see a lot in the press and the media about various different ransomware attacks. Ostensibly, ransomware is a malware that prevents users from accessing their system either by locking their screen so they can't access the information, or by locking the user's files until a ransom is paid, hence the term ransomware. It can be used against individuals and against networks. An evolving malware now uses dynamic keys and secure methods to transmit keys to command and control capabilities. So basically it can be run remotely, and the threat is growing ever more sophisticated. According to Becker's Hospital Review, the first reported case of ransomware actually happened back in 1989. So this is not a new threat per se. It's really kind of the commonality which is really becoming the major reason we're talking about it right now. It's been 28 years since the first recorded instance, and healthcare tends to be, for various reasons, the primary area of attack. In part because of the lack of sophistication of the IT infrastructure within healthcare, as well as the nature of the criticality in terms of accessing data. It really is a kind of a slightly less mature ecosystem than many other areas. But again, it's not unique to healthcare. It does happen elsewhere. Healthcare simply just is an easy target.
Yeah, ransomware, it continues to evolve, and to the point where you now have ransomware as a service. Think of it like having software as a service. I write the code, and then I blast it out, send it to a group of folks that want to actually purchase it, and then they blast it out across the entire, network space, as it were. It's low risk, basic anonymity, and it's low barrier to entry. I mean, anyone can actually write the code and send out ransomware now without any risk of actually being found out of where it originated. Think of it this way, right? So if I'm fishing, then if I go out and actually cast a single rod, then I'm only going to catch but so many fish. However, if I cast a wide net out there, I can basically up my ante of what my return is going to be, especially with Bitcoin. With the rise of Bitcoin, I'm able to actually collect my bounty, as it were, and without anyone being the wiser, and then essentially dropping it down to an actual USB drive, and then going on and cashing my rewards. So ransomware as a service, I think, will continue to grow. People will continue to use this. You'll probably have new folks popping up from high school as it were, just so they can, make a bit of money using this as an opportunity. Some of the examples of ransomware incidents, I can mention Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center that you see on your screen now was actually reduced to pen and paper for record keeping over a week. They ultimately paid 40 Bitcoins, and that was equivalent to 17,000 to get the hospital up and running again. Now because we're located in the Washington, D.C. area, we know of a local hospital that was hit with ransomware and was out of commission for upwards of 3 to 4 weeks. And even then, it still took a considerable amount of time to be able to support the patients and give the services and the care that they normally would provide. In December 2016, the Los Angeles Community College District paid 28,000 in Bitcoins to their ransomware person. And it's interesting because this leads itself into, I think part of their, was that they actually brought in their insurance company, which actually paid the ransom on their behalf. So it lends itself to the type of cybersecurity insurance that you're having as well.
So the interesting thing is when you actually look at the amount of money being paid from a ransomware perspective, most of the cost is really not in the ransom itself. As Jermaine alluded to the fact that, hospitals basically being restricted to pen and paper operations. This not only has a short-term impact in terms of their ability to actually operate their core facilities, but from an ongoing perspective as well, if they're unable to submit medical claims to the insurance hospital because they're not coded correctly, this is not even after they've resolved the issue at hand, they still have weeks, if not months, of damages. And so this really becomes a significant business operations issue for many facilities and many institutions. And Cybersecurity Ventures actually predicts that the cost from a damages perspective to industry is going to exceed $5 billion in 2017. And again, to be clear, that's not specifically the amount paid for the ransom itself, which typically tends to be a reasonably small amount relative to the size of the organization being impacted. It really is the direct impact that has on the business operations as well. Some other studies, Symantec, again, they discovered almost 500,000 ransomware detections in 2016 alone, and more than 400,000 machines were affected by the WannaCry attack. And so, the impact of these, you add Petya onto this, hitting 65 countries. Again, the prevalence and the ability for it to expand exponentially is significant, and really what makes ransomware a unique threat.
Yeah, and as Grant mentioned, there's a few well-known ransomware code that's out there in the wild. He mentioned Petya. There's a return of Locky, WannaCry. It's interesting because I actually had a customer that I was working with, and most folks think it's ransomware can be locked down or isolated to their internal networks. But this one particular customer I was working with actually got hit with the Locky. And while I was working with them, it was one, and again, the most of this company employees actually work remotely. So this one laptop was actually infected with ransomware, and they were using Dropbox. And that while they thought that it would stay isolated to just that laptop, it actually, because they were using the Dropbox plugin, it actually ran into their Dropbox account and started actually locking those files in Dropbox as well. Now, the thing with that was that at the very minimum, they had the ability to recover files from a previous state, but just thinking that it's only limited to your internal networks, or those networks that exist inside your four walls or in a data center, is something that you need to reconsider. That in fact, if you are using software as a services where you're using plugins to actually attach to other networks, such as Google Drive, their plugin that allows you to directly connect, Dropbox, Office 365, things of those nature that will allow you to sync data from your laptop to the cloud. Be concerned that if a laptop is in fact infected, or that's on-prem that you may in fact infect other files that are actually in the cloud themselves. So what do some of these actually look like? So this is actually CryptoLocker. As you can see, there's a time limit to pay the ransom. You see there's the time limit on the screen there that counts down. If this malware doesn't ask for the same amount of money, but incorporate its own currency table. Here's another threat finder. It's unique because there's no known DLL-based file encrypting ransomware. Threat finder also uses Bitcoin for payment. So if you've seen any of these types of things, just be aware that, you know, at this point, you already know that your device is infected. Jigsaw is deletes files if you take too long to pay. Ransomware of $150 and deletes 1,000 files every hour.
That's a bit scary.
CryptoWall essentially is a family of file encrypting ransomware that first appeared in early 2014. It is widely distributed using various exploit kits. CryptoWall basically has affected North America the most, with the US and Canada making up the 13% of the infections that we see out there. Now, this is what it can pretend to look like. So I'm sure many of us have been clicking around and landed on websites, and all of a sudden you get a pop-up saying, hey, your machine is infected with something, and run this tool to clean up your machine. And so it can look like an antivirus or even anti-malware. You can actually see get a message from authorities such as FBI, the IRS. Unfortunately, I actually had a close friend of mine actually end up in this scenario in which it cost him $8,000 that he paid out because he thought he received information from the IRS. Lastly, you can look like email from a trusted source, CEO of your company, the accounting department wanting this information from you, that someone that you trust. So you have to be careful about what you're clicking on and what you're being sent to. Make sure that the person that's sending it to you is the actual person. Pick up the phone. I know it's old school, but or at least send a text. Did you send me this email? Did this information come from you directly? Now, what causes ransomware infections? You know, for the most part, you know, it's accidental, unknown downloads, spam email, clicking on something that I shouldn't click on, or that I wasn't sure if it came from the person that who sent it to me. Devices. I was actually reading an article the other day about the smoking devices, the vapors, right? The vape devices, where there's some malware that's running on some of the vape pens, because you know you can charge them by connecting to a USB port. And even using those, you connect them to your USB ports, and that can infect your actual devices as well. Program vulnerabilities, out of date. You know, I think one of the biggest hits across Europe was running old OS for Microsoft. Microsoft had actually patched that particular vulnerability back in March of 2017, and still so many machines were affected because they didn't have an effective patching or software updates program within those environments. And you can be infected and not know it. I mean, it can actually, there's the drop, so it'll drop a bit of code on your machine and download information, so it can send it to other machines and then do a second upload to pull information after it's actually run across your devices as well.
Yeah, and that's an important point, because that's what creates secondary infections and how these things spread. Because again, you know, just because your machine hasn't popped up with some sort of ransomware demand doesn't mean to say the malware isn't present. And so you have kind of host machines that, again, will look to access your address book, or will look to find some other way to expand or propagate the malware. So again, it's always good to make sure that you're checking your machine, getting it checked out by your IT group to make sure that you don't have anything inherently there. You know, as we talked about earlier on, clearly, you know, the overall cost of this, and not just the incidence numbers are going up. The average ransomware demand has actually increased. But, coming back to this point we mentioned earlier on, the actual amount itself is not particularly large, but if you look at the amount of instances and the amount of machines that are infected, you can see how this quickly becomes a very profitable service for organizations to do this, and why, again, there is this increasing ransomware as a service opportunity out there. A Google study, along with some chain analysis, US San Diego and the New York University Tandem School, found that $25 million had been paid in ransom in the last 2 years. So again, not a huge amount. Obviously, anything with $1 million is a big number, but relative to the business disruption we talked about, and you can see FBI itself reported $200 million just in damages over the first 3 months. And insurance companies are getting wise to this as well. At the moment, the indications are that insurance companies are paying out, as Jermaine mentioned earlier on. But you're starting to see separate carve-outs within insurance policies today around about ransomware, and potentially additional coverage that may be required. Again, more so to cover the business disruption rather than the ransom itself. But for sure, I'm sure you can appreciate, if you've got insurance companies on the hook for hundreds of thousands of companies, even a small amount starts to add up. And and this is going to continue to grow, right? According to Cisco, their report said that they're actually seeing a 350% increase in the instance of ransomware. And so, if this problem is big today, it's going to only continue to get bigger. And so it's up to us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to basically protect against that. The important thing to bear in mind is that paying the ransom itself does not guarantee A, that you're going to get your data back, right? Or B, that they've removed the malicious code. So again, maybe you do get the data back, but if that malicious code is still there, they could, again, very quickly infect you again and demand more money, etc. I mean, you have to work on the assumption that these are criminals. They're not principled businessmen. And so, taking their word for the fact they're going to give you it. Now, in most cases, I think it's been shown that people have got their data back, but there are more than sufficient in a number of cases to indicate that that's not always been the case. And obviously, as this grows to become a greater problem, that's obviously going to be increasingly a concern or a risk that you're going to have to take.
Now, this big unplug here is specifically if you think that you've been infected with ransomware. For the most part, having a pretty robust incident management or incident response plan of action is really what you want to make sure that you have in place. Now, obviously, with any type of infection, the first thing you want to do is unplug. If you're connected to a network inside of your organization, you want to disconnect that laptop, shut off any Wi-Fi's as quickly as you possibly can, so you can limit the infection in and of itself. Any storage devices, things of that nature. Now, again, as it relates to this, the growth of ransomware and the enhanced capabilities, the one thing that we didn't or even touch on, and I'm just going to bring up just here now, is that with the Internet of Things out there, and purchasing your NIST and making your lives a bit easier, you have to consider that those devices, if you're not changing your passwords or going through the security that you need to on those devices as well, that they have the capability of creating damage out there as well. And so, as a reminder, that security is a responsibility for all of us, even as citizens, to do our part. The one thing that you want to make sure, though, is that you deal with ransomware and things of that nature by having a robust incident management program. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you unplug or disconnect those things. Now, there's again, coming from the old school, there's always been the security in layers, right? So the one thing that we want to make sure is that we're scanning all incoming emails and URLs. Now, what we've as a society, we've grown and technology where we have on-prem folks and we have off-prem folks. So this gets a bit more difficult in managing all of these where your data is, who has access, who's VPN into your network, and things of that nature. But to as much as we possibly can, when it comes to our email system, we want to make sure that we are tracking any type of spam or malware. There's a number of SaaS-based tools out there that will allow you, that will do the scan on the front end. As it relates to antivirus, make sure that all your systems, whether or not they're internal to your prem or off-site, are running and being updated. I think that's, some people just, drop the ball and just do an install on antivirus and think that, okay, I don't have to check it. It's doing the updates as it should be. But you got to make sure that you are in fact checking those devices, that they are doing what you bought them for. Firewalls, even at the workstation level, making sure that your firewalls are enabled, because most of us, a good portion of us will walk into a Panera or Starbucks and we'll sit down and go to work. If I don't have my firewall on and I'm not running actively, running my antivirus, anyone inside that actual location can gain access to my individual device and wreak havoc. So we want to make sure that we're looking at this in layers, protect the perimeter, protect the individual devices, the endpoints, make sure that we're educating our employees that this is what they should be doing when they're in the field with our devices, and any type of IDS or IPS scans that we can run to make sure that any of the machines that were out there aren't communicating more than they should be on the network.
So it's really important to understand that, from a perspective of where does the responsibility for managing security start? And ultimately, it's with all of this, right? We use this term that cybersecurity is a team sport, because, if you look at how phishing campaigns, if you look at how much of this malware gets into our organization, it's typically through an employee doing something and not necessarily being aware of it, right? So really, it's important to try and keep the whole concept of security and the culture of security front of mind. And the way to do that is not to do annual training, as some of the compliance requirements for various different regulations require, but rather to train on an ongoing basis. Again, you want to make sure that, when someone does come across a particular email or they come across some sort of threat, that they have top of mind the concept of, I just went through this last week, or I just went through this the other day. Not, I remember something like that, or as a case, don't remember something like that about 6 months ago or 9 months ago. So really focus on ongoing training. We use this term, better to train for 10 minutes a month than 2 hours a year, because again, if you make just annual training, it becomes mandatory, it becomes a chore for everyone involved. You get a checkbox at the end of it, but fundamentally, you're really not actually improving the knowledge and understanding of your employees, and that's really what you're trying to do. The other thing today that people should absolutely be doing within any organization, because it's never been able to do it, is run phishing campaigns. Now, if everyone's familiar with phishing is again where you receive an email from a third party, from a hacker, that tries to get you to click on a link that allows them to download software, as some examples showed earlier on. And that's really how many of the infections either get installed or passed on. There are lots of organizations today, training companies, that will actually allow you to actually run simulated phishing campaigns within your organization, because it doesn't matter how often you train people. There are always those in your organization that are going to click everything that's in front of them. So you're creating a safe environment where you can simulate a phishing campaign, you can simulate an email coming from the CEO, an email coming from Pizza Hut or wherever it is, and you can see whether or not your employees or your users are actually clicking on the links that they shouldn't. And it teaches users as to how to identify and how to recognize a phishing campaign, and what routine steps you can take if you're unsure, to basically validate the case or not. And ultimately, the answer is, if you are unsure, don't click, but many people will click instantly, and the phishing campaigns help to educate and keep that front of mind as well. And again, that also allows you to create this culture of security. And what do we mean? I mean, culture of security sounds like one of those kind of buzz phrases, but really you want people within your organization to care. And you do that by educating them not just on what they should or shouldn't do, but make them involved in the process, help them understand and be proud of the security culture within your organization. There's obviously a trade-off in any organization in terms of how you manage security, There's always going to be inconvenience in the process of getting things done. But if people understand the broader value of doing it, if people can understand that there's value to them in getting it done, if you can reward people for effective cyber hygiene, then again you can get much better buy-in and make the people prouder of their contribution, and really try and make your employees at the front line of your cyber defense. And that's ultimately what you're trying to get. Make them your eyes and ears, because they're going to be the first ones potentially to identify where there is a specific issue.
Yeah, and the other thing, again, as it relates to what I was saying before, you know, there are things, preventative measures that you can take that to help at least limit the land and expand of ransomware, right? So as much as you can, and I know every organization is different. I used to work in a law firm, and so disabling macros on a machine would have been, you know, they would have yelled bloody murder because of the number of macros that they use in a law firm. However, wherever you can, you know, start limiting basically user access to systems. I know many folks find it easier to allow their end users to have administrative rights on their systems. You know, as much as you can limit the amount of privileges that they have, the better off you are in managing ransomware. Make sure your systems are patched. You know, if you're using Microsoft, then, you know, there's monthly patches that come out every second Tuesday of the month. They're pretty spot on. Give you basically exactly what they're patching. Additionally, if you're using open source tools, they have scheduled patch releases, and it's easy enough to go out and join some RSS feeds so you can download and know exactly what's out there. Additionally, you can educate yourself, educate your users. US CERT is a great place to see what's actually active in the wild, where users are, that you can educate your actual users on. I use it personally to make sure that when I go out there, I can see, okay, this is what the government's reporting that's in the wild. So I need to make sure that my users are aware of that. Again, make sure that your antivirus is up to date. Make sure that, you know, that your users are in fact checking that their antivirus is up to date. If they're patching systems and they're remote, then if you don't have a VPN connected system where you can push out your patches via a centralized location, then make sure that they are, you know, send out a notification that, hey, it's monthly patch time. Please make sure that your systems are patched and up to date, and just to stay on top of it. These are some preventative measures that you can take, as well as training your end users, as Grant stated before, on how to limit ransomware and its proliferation throughout the world, or even your organization for that matter.
So number 4 on our list of things you should do, and it seems obvious, but you know, you would be amazed how many organizations I speak to where they can't answer these simple questions, is, you know where your data is, right? We work with an abundance of data in our organizations today, but not all data is equal, right? We have sensitive data, we have personally identifiable information, social security information, credit card information, potentially protected health information. We have different types of data within our organization, and you don't necessarily need to treat all data equally. If you spend your time trying to secure everything, you're really securing nothing. And so you have to basically protect data in layers, right? So step 1, classify your data, right? You need to differentiate between sensitive and non-sensitive data, between public data and private data. So having an effective data classification policy and understanding what type of data you have is critical. Know specifically where that data is located, right? I mean, the data is typically located in some sort of data repository. That data repository can be a piece of paper, or it can be some sort of machine, a laptop, a server, a fax machine, a printer. There are a number of different devices that store or have access to data either in rest or in transit, right? So you need to understand where those devices are, and you need to be tracking them. And you probably, for the best part, want to either own those, or you want to make sure you have an effective agreement with whoever does own them, that they're making appropriate protections in place. I'm always amazed at many companies that come across where maybe they have developers that use their own machines at home, or People are using their own mobile devices. And the challenge with that environment is if you don't understand the flow of data, how can you ensure that that developer's home machine has the relevant protections on it, as Jermaine mentioned, and the way that you can do if you basically own that machine and you have access to that machine as well. So, understanding where your data is. Not everyone needs to have access to all data, but again, this comes down to the fact that if you don't know what different types of data you have, and you're not restricting who's access, then one person that gets infected suddenly has access to everything. And we've definitely seen that in some of the recent major breaches that we've encountered recently, where the problem is less the fact that they were unable to prevent the initial breach. It's that, if you take the Anthem breach as an example recently, again, that was a user escalation, privilege escalation issue where they were able to access someone who had admin rights into the admin database and was able to access literally everything. And so you want to make sure that, again, really, really tie down who has access to what data to only people that have critical access. And if you can, within your organization today, run some type of report that says, I know what data I have, I know by classification or sensitivity, I know where it is, and I know who has access to it, then you cannot protect that data. And then the last point here, really, and probably one of the most important points, especially when it comes to ransomware, is backing up your data. And that cannot be overestimated, because fundamentally, it's going to be your backup that's going to save you. And if you have recent backups, if you're doing regular backups, if you follow the steps we've talked about before, and you've disconnected your network, you can basically reinstall all your OS, you can get back to a safe state of operation, and then you can restore the latest version of the data you have, which will minimize the loss. Because again, you're only at your most vulnerable. If you have no backups or no recent backups, then the lack of access to that data suddenly becomes more of a problem for you than if you can simply just restore something that was done an hour ago, 24 hours ago, whatever the case may be. So again, it really is essential. If you don't have an effective backup process, you need to have one across all of your sensitive data. And again, maybe you only have to back up your really sensitive or valuable data. You don't necessarily have to back up other data. That's kind of part of the data classification piece.
And I'll just add one thing to that, to the last point that you made with backing up data. It's not just enough just to back it up, but you have to test it periodically to make sure that you can recover it. I've seen scenarios and been in scenarios where we were taking consistent backups all the way through, but when we came to restore those backups, because had not been testing them to make sure that we could fundamentally do it in the time frame in which we stated, or that the data was in fact readable after the restore, is you got to make sure that you're actually periodically restoring that data to make sure that you can go in, see it, make sure it's still there, make sure it's not corrupted or anything of that nature. But yeah, just wanted to add to that. You got to test your backups as well.
So again, what do you want to do from an ongoing basis? So again, you don't really want to be caught when this happens without a plan. The chances are that you're going to get impacted somehow. To what severity is, it doesn't matter, right? I guarantee you, if you look at your email inbox today, you will find evidence of phishing in that email inbox. And most of that today, with some really good email services from Microsoft and from Google and other services, do a good job at basically filtering it into spam, or basically filtering it into different buckets that mean we're less likely to click on the data. But it's going to be there. So you should assume and work on your business continuity plan to assume that this is going to happen. And then what is your response going to be? You really do not want to be making decisions when your screen is flashing. You want to know immediately what the step plan is to get into. So write an incident response plan now, or as soon as possible, so you understand the steps that you as an organization are going to take depending on the different scenario. Obviously, you need to, in order to make that effective, you have to understand what your vulnerabilities are. You need to, as I mentioned earlier on, know where is my sensitive data. You need to document what is the likelihood of an occurrence happening, and what is the impact on my business. Again, if this server goes down versus that server, if this data gets missing versus that data, what is the impact? Because again, that's going to drive the urgency of my response and maybe the way that I respond. And obviously, by taking a risk-based approach to this, you're in a position to be able to sort of better understand how much money or how much investment you need to make in the various different tools that are available for you. Things like getting penetration testing done on your network. Again, there's a number of technical reasons why people will basically take advantage of these things, and it's very difficult for your own developers or your own in-house engineers always to identify. So a third-party penetration test on a routine basis to test the validity of your code, to test for backdoors, for various different SQL injection, privilege escalation, various different things. Make sure that that is being tested so you can understand where the attacks are coming from. And importantly, we speak to a lot of customers on a long basis who tell me that their number one objective is to actually be compliant, right? Maybe they're in healthcare, and so HIPAA is a focus or high trust is a focus. It's really important that we don't confuse the difference between compliance and security, because they're not the same thing. You can be compliant without being secure, and you can be secure without necessarily being compliant. Now, one would assume, or one would hope, that if you do a good enough job on implementing an effective security program, the chances are you're going to meet most of the compliance obligations. But compliance is about demonstrating that you're operating securely, not necessarily about being secure directly. So that's why you can miss some of those things. But compliance doesn't necessarily mean you're secure. And let me give an example of that, as we talked about earlier on in training, right? Many compliance requirements require you to do annual training. And again, you can meet that compliance requirement by doing once a year annual training. As we talked earlier on, is that really going to enhance your security, right? And so you really want to be thinking about what's the most effective way for me to improve my security, from which hopefully I can do what else I need to do in order to meet any compliance obligations I have. But really do everything from the focus of managing security, because ultimately that's going to be the biggest driver for you. And just remember, there is no such thing as complete security. And all we can do is manage against risk. And we want to try and reduce that risk to the lowest possible denominator we can, based on the budget that we have available. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can, or everything that we consider to be reasonable within the business operations we're doing. But because we know we can't eradicate risk completely, that's why we have to make sure we have an effective incident response plan and effective business continuity plans. So obviously, we spend a lot of time, Jermaine and I, thinking about many of these issues. As a former CISO, and Jermaine is a CISO right now, we not only have been involved in challenges like these on a day-to-day basis directly, but we help many of our customers. And really, fundamentally, that's why we've developed the MyVCM Compliance Manager platform. As a former CISO myself, when you start to appreciate and realize the number of things that you should be doing as an organization, to track and manage your overall security program, you start to realize this is less about a tick in the box. This is less about publishing a bunch of policies. Day to day, there's a bunch of operational things you have to be doing on a routine, ongoing basis. And hopefully you can do it in such a way that not only can you demonstrate that you're being successful and executing these plans to your internal staff, to your board, to your executive team, but also to any third-party organizations, partners, customers, vendors, regulators, etc. as well. So the reason that we built MyVCM Compliance Manager is really to help organizations who are trying to do this make it a little bit easier, to make it a little bit more effective for them to track, manage, and operationalize it. So again, you can build all your contingency planning within MyVCM. We allow you to track software versions and dependencies. So again, if you look at recent examples where the version XP had basically was obsolete, you'd be able to track that within our platform. We allow you to automate a whole bunch of processes, like making sure that documentation is kept up to date, automating your training, making sure that things like simply patching servers, running data access audits, all those workflows are automated. And we help you manage third-party risk. We've talked a lot about what you do internally, but clearly, and a more heterogeneous world that we live in, where different organizations are more dependent than ever on partners and vendors, your third parties are also risk as well. So you want to make sure that they're doing as much, if not more, than you're doing, so that you don't invest all this time in protecting your environment, and then the risk basically happens with one of your vendors. And as I mentioned, know where your data is. And again, within MyVCM, the ability to be able to track and manage what type of data you have, where specifically that data is, and who has access to that data is really an invaluable resource of information. And as I said, we do it in a way that allows it to be more cost effective, because we can basically save you the time and the resource costs that you have to do to track this manually and with bodies. And because we roll MyVCM out to the entire organization, We make sure that every single employee within the organization is involved in the process. We not only make sure that they are contributing to the process, but we actually score them. We give them individually their own scores so they understand what their contribution is, and we benchmark them so that we actually show them whether they're above average, below average, top 10%, top 15% as well. And that really has been shown through the customers we have today to really drive employee engagement and to make them feel that we're part of the process. And then again, to make sure that both management and the general workforce are all on the same page when it comes to managing and operating their security program. So just some final thoughts before we wrap up, because I know we're coming close to time and I want to make sure we have enough time for some questions. In summary, preparation for this is key. As we talked about making sure you have a plan. Obviously, by attending webinars like this, it's helping you to understand and become educated in the problem, and that's a great first step. But making sure that we understand and follow some of the key steps that we outlined is going to be a huge step forward in being able to respond to one of these types of incidents. I can't overestimate the importance of doing security awareness training. It really isn't, as we've said before, a one and done. It really is something you want to be encouraging people to understand, and try and make it creative. Try and gamify it as much as possible. Try and make it part of the kind of culture of your organization. But it really is going to be essential to try and keep this kind of information top of mind for your employees, because that, as we've mentioned before, is going to be a significant step forward that you're going to basically have moving forward. And backup, right? We've got this highlighted again. I mentioned it before. There's a number of things we can do. But at the end of the day, if you have an effective backup, even if you do get targeted, even if you are the victim of ransomware, the most recent backup is going to be your saving grace. Because again, as we said, you can simply reset and then restore, and that's going to be a big part that's going to get you through the immediate problem. So, ultimately, we need to stay vigilant, right? We are trusting by nature. We all click on things that we probably shouldn't. And so we can do everything we can to try and reduce the likelihood that that's going to happen, but it is going to happen. And so this protection and the layers that Jermaine talked about are all individual components that are going to reduce the overall risk of either an attack being successful, or if it is successful, the impact that that attack's going to have. And it really is a question of making sure you think before you click.
Great, thank you both so much, Jermaine and Grant. So I can see that we have had some questions in. So we have this great one from Scott, which I'm going to turn over to you, Jermaine. And Scott asks, can I just rename my files and regain access to them after it gets encrypted? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott. I wish it was that simple. I wish all you had to do is just rename it and then you're good to go again. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. Ransomware infections make use of cryptography to ensure that the victim's data becomes unusable unless they actually have the key to decrypt the locked files. So in layman terms, what that means is that they put a lock on the file, and they are the only ones that have a key to unlock the file. And changing the actual name of the file won't do anything for you at all. But great question, though.
Great, thank you. And I see another one here from John. And John asks, what are Bitcoins? Are there other ways to pay? What do you think, Grant?
Well, so Bitcoins are interesting in the sense that, first of all, people, I'm sure, will understand Bitcoins are digital currency. It's a kind of new way of creating a payment method, which is actually very transparent. You can actually maintain a whole Bitcoin series, and you can understand, who's paid what. And the reason that we know how many ransomware ransom being paid that are paid in Bitcoin is because we have the records. We can see the records. It's pretty clear. But clearly, Bitcoin wasn't around in the first ransomware attack was made back in '89. What Bitcoin has done, though, is created that level of ease where, again, you can be remote and you can set up a Bitcoin payment requirement in a way that allows you to transfer the money and access the money in a way that is difficult for you to be identified. Other mechanisms through banks, through cash, or through any other type of process is monitorable, and the FBI, the international security agencies have demonstrated mechanisms to basically track that down eventually. But Bitcoin is by the nature of it, much more difficult to do that. And so that's kind of really why it's become the payment mechanism of choice by many of these attackers, and a big reason why ransomware is basically exploded the way it has.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, which I'm going to turn over to Jermaine. And this is from Sarah, who asks, how will I know if I've been infected by ransomware?
So Sarah, I'm going to do, you were watching, there were a couple of slides that actually we showed earlier on that would show a pop-up essentially. But some other ways that you know you've been infected is that the machine itself can slow down. Your clicks may seem buggy. You could have an additional pop-ups actually occur on the screen in and of itself. And then you might start to see your files disappear, or they turn into an icon that you may not notice or have never seen on your computer before. Ultimately, your machine may freeze, and then you may just get a pop-up on the screen, just like in one of the previous slides that we showed that says, you're infected. In order to get your files released, you need to send X amount of Bitcoins to this account, etc. So, you know, it may be a slow process, and that's just one of the in-your-face type of infections. There may be a sleeper infection where they've actually downloaded a file to your machine just so they can hunt around and see what's on the network before it starts the second phase of the attack in and of itself. Those are a little bit more elusive, as it were.
Great, fantastic. Well, I think that is all the questions that I see from our audience today. So I want to say thank you very much for listening to our webinar about ransomware. We hope that you found it helpful. To learn more about Ostendio's MyVCM, please visit our website at www.ostendio.com. As a reminder, we will be sending an email out with a link to this recording shortly. We hope you'll join us again soon.